sorry, folks, there's nothing special about us other than that we were founded on biblical principles, on the principles of individual liberty that protected us. We were built on a solid foundation. It took a long time to erode that foundation, but it has been eroded, and we are in great danger as a nation, as individuals, as families, and we need to prepare accordingly.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We have a returning guest of some renown. Alex Newman is the senior editor of the New American Magazine. And Alex, you're also a co-organizer of G. Edward Griffin's recent Red Pill Expo on Jekyll Island, and you have other publications you contribute to, including the Epoch Times and WorldNet Daily. Other things people should know about where they can find you?
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I do a whole bunch of things and wear lots of hats, and none of them very well. But I'm the founder of Liberty Sentinel. You can find us at libertysentinel.org. That's kind of my personal website blog thing. And then I'm the executive director of Public School Exit. I know one of the things we'll be talking about today is the public school system. So we've launched a new ministry, Public School Exit. You can find us at publicschoolexit.com to try to liberate and protect as many children as possible from the insane government indoctrination system masquerading as an education system.
You've had a chance before on our channel to talk to us about the foundations of the American government school system and how it was essentially founded by socialist, communist ideologies and was intended specifically and explicitly to indoctrinate and create generations of compliant members of our country who are willing to go along with those ideas. And we're seeing evidence of that in how that's played out. So it's, as you've said on other interviews where you've appeared, you said the school system has done exactly what it was intended, what it was designed to do. And the question is, are parents aware of that? Mostly not. And do they approve of that? Mostly would be horrified. So we'll put a link in the description of this video to get people back to those previous interviews if they'd like to follow up on those topics. But today we'd like to hit just a few questions coming right out of our recent trauma that we've been through in 2020 of the COVID-related lockdowns. First of all, what are we learning about our society and about our leaders through this experience? What are some key takeaways for you and those you've spoken with about the lockdowns themselves and what we're learning from them?
One of the things that really was most shocking to me was how quickly such a large segment of the American people was willing to surrender its freedom. I actually did not have that dim of a view of Americans until the COVID panic hit. And, everybody will tell you, people kind of, it's like a running joke. Now, nobody believes the media anymore, right? You could talk to anybody, even liberals are like, oh yeah, the media, they just lie all the time. And that's what people say, in the polling data. Something like 6% of Americans still say they really trust the news. And yet, when the media comes out with this, fake news about we're all going to die, 2.2 million are going to die from coronavirus, all the rest of it, a huge segment of the American people, it's hard to know exactly how many, but you can go into a grocery store and you see, around here at least half of the people are wearing face diapers and hiding in their basements. People don't want to go to church. A very significant segment of the public believed the propaganda, and not only believed the propaganda, but believed it to the extent that they were willing to surrender their liberty. And I thought that was incredibly depressing, incredibly demoralizing. If you had told me in February that Americans would surrender that much liberty that quickly in response to overblown media hype, I would not have believed it. I would have said, no, I know the American people, they've been brainwashed, they've been dumbed down, but they're not that dumb. They're not that ready to surrender their freedom. And yet here we are. I think slowly people are now starting to kind of come out of it. You mentioned the Red Pill Expo. We had hundreds and almost 1,000 people. I think 750 people. Nobody wearing face diapers. Nobody's anti-social distancing. Everybody was just hanging out, having a good time. And guess what? Nobody died from COVID. Imagine that. J. Edward Griffin's 88 years old now. He's no face diaper. Wasn't concerned at all. Everybody's fine. So I think people, at least some people, are gradually realizing that the tyranny was a mistake. And we also have some nice examples to compare to. I lived in Sweden most of the last decade. Anybody can look at Sweden and say, hey, they didn't do lockdowns, they didn't do shutdowns, they didn't destroy their economy, they didn't mandate face diapers. In fact, the government told them face diapers were a bad idea. They didn't keep the kids home from school. They didn't do anti-social distancing. And everybody's fine. In fact, they have a significantly lower death rate than the United States, than UK, than Spain, than all these countries that, literally destroyed their economy and stole everybody's liberty. So clearly clearly the lockdowns didn't work. And so we got that going for us. But I think we did learn a lot about human nature. People who don't have confidence in God, people who don't know where they're going when they die, they really get in a panic when the media tells them they might die. Oh my goodness, take all my freedom, lock me in my basement, whatever it takes, just protect my life at all costs, even above and beyond my liberty, my family, the well-being of my children. That wasn't necessarily surprising, but you got a lot of people who say, oh, I'm Christian, I'm going to heaven, and yet they're cowering in their basement, worried about, a little virus that might get them. So it's been a rough time. I don't expect it's going to get better anytime soon, unfortunately. In fact, I'm hearing from a lot of sources that second round of lockdowns is coming, maybe a COVID-20 or a COVID-21 that might potentially actually be more serious than COVID-19. So, and the censorship on social media, they war-gamed all this out. That's one of the things that was so interesting to me. In 2010, the Rockefeller Foundation put out this report. They had 4 scenarios. It was called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development, basically 4 scenarios for how we could move toward the New World Order. And one of the scenarios was called Lockstep. It was about a future pandemic that would require authoritarian control over all citizens, biometric IDs for everybody, mandatory face diapers for everyone, temperature checks to get into public places, more global governance, more totalitarian control of our movement, and on and on. It's like you're reading the news. And they actually go in there and they say, oh, well, communist China, they did wonderful in this hypothetical pandemic because they don't have all those things like, rule of law and constitutional rights and all the rest of it. But meanwhile, all those other countries like America, well, they suffered greatly because of their attachment to these things. And then one of the key takeaways from that report is even after the pandemic faded, and remember, this was 10 years ago, even after the pandemic faded, the authoritarian measures stuck and even intensified. Okay, then we had the Event 201. This was hosted in October of 2019 at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, co-sponsored by the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they had 8 hours. You can go watch this all on YouTube. They imagined a hypothetical novel coronavirus coming out of China that would be really bad news. And they said, so what do we do about it? They brought together leaders from business, government, and all the rest of it. And they said, we got to censor social media. You can't just have people posting whatever they want on there. And then they asked the question, well, what if it's coming from governments, right? I'm sure they had President Trump in mind. What if it's coming from governments? Well, we got to censor that too. And sure enough, just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen Twitter, we've seen Facebook literally removing posts from the elected president of the United States, giving his perspective on COVID, on the danger of COVID, on its relationship to the seasonal flu, and all the rest of it. You've got YouTube, the CEO of YouTube, going on the fakest of all the fake news networks, on CNN, saying anything that contradicts World Health Organization is going to be removed from our platform. Well, we know the World Health Organization is a lapdog for the mass murdering dictatorship in China. It's run by Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, who's not a doctor. His main claim to fame was he was on the Politburo of the mass murdering ethno-Marxist terror group called the Tigray People's Liberation Front. And so now these guys get to decide what we can say and what we can see and what we can hear on YouTube. The world is completely upside down. It's just kind of a sample of the tyranny, but I think we're being lied to at every level, and I think we really need to resist.
You mentioned the medical aspects of the COVID and what is and isn't important for us to know about it. We just interviewed a nutritional specialist who's a chiropractic doctor as well, and his point was that we have not been told something that we knew ever since in 1917 of the Spanish flu epidemic and the swine flu and on through, and that is that obese people and people with hyperglycemia are at much higher risk of contracting because they're already carrying a lot of inflammation load in their immune system, have twice as long of dealing with illnesses, and much higher percentage of shedding and potentially spreading these illnesses then. So here we have a cultural contrast between Sweden, for example, and how they handled the policy basis versus other countries. He contrasted based on a normalized per population Japan versus Spain versus the U.S. and compared the populations, compared the obesity rates, which are very strikingly different between those 3 countries, and their COVID rates, and saw that the outcomes are scaled, very correlated with the rate of obesity. So, in other words, we're seeing, silence pretty much. They talk about a comorbidity, but they don't say this is a huge risk factor. This is what we need to do to stay safer as a country. Is we need to get healthy, get lean and healthy as Americans, that sort of thing, get our vitamin D levels up, that sort of thing. So he talked to us about the things that we should be doing that we're not hearing from our leaders, and instead they're just taking away our liberties. And also when you talked about encroachment of the freedom of speech, it's been a very chilling effect among all independent media personalities who run broadcasts and so on the internet, is the deplatforming. People, dozens of platforms have been removed from YouTube and had to go elsewhere to Brighteon or BitChute and other platforms to try to get the word out. And that's especially crippling at a time when, if we're not hearing what we need to be hearing from official sources, so people are having to turn to and rely to these independent sources, and then those are getting silenced, the actual human life impact of that is just redoubled.
Yeah, it is. And, a lie depends on censorship. A lie depends on propaganda to be perpetuated. The truth doesn't need censorship. The truth doesn't need deplatforming. If these people were being honest, anybody would be able to look at their claims and say, hey, they're being honest. I'll put my face diaper on, right? There's a whole bunch of scientific studies. I can look at how they were done. I can replicate them. Hey, give me a face diaper. I want to keep myself safe from COVID. The reason they are having to censor everybody is because they can't do that. It's because they're lying to us on point after point after point. Even at the most basic level, the idea that this testing is legitimate, right? Look at the test that they're using, the PCR test. I've got a video of the guy who invented the PCR test, Dr. Kerry Mullis, who very conveniently died just a few months before the COVID pandemic, saying you can find anything in anyone, right? The way this test works, if you find one molecule of a coronavirus, you can amplify it to the point where you can say, hey, look, this guy's got COVID-19. No, he didn't, right? There's just molecules floating all over the place. What the test does is it amplifies and amplifies until you can actually measure and detect a level of that there. And he said you should never use this thing to diagnose an infection, to determine that somebody has a viral infection. You should never use it for that. That's not what it's for. And yet, these tests are being used to tell us that everybody's got coronavirus. Here in my home state of Florida, they've been caught red-handed on multiple occasions. A guy with a gunshot wound to the head died of COVID. A guy from a motorcycle accident died of COVID. A lady who died from breaking her hip, falling down steps, died of COVID. I mean, they think we're a bunch of idiots. We had laboratories all over the state that were returning 100% positive COVID-19 test results. And some of the people were like, wait a minute, I stood in line for an hour. I realized this was going to be an 8-hour wait. I decided to go home, and yet they sent me a letter saying I was positive for COVID. How could they know I'm positive for COVID if I didn't take the test? We are being deceived on every level. And I'm convinced now that this is not so much about health. This is about tyranny. I think the reason we are seeing all these lies, they're not just lying for lying's sake. They're lying because they want to take our liberty. They want to destroy our economy. They want to hollow out the middle class. And you can see very clearly who benefits, right? They tell you can't go to church. Church is not essential. You can't go to a small business to do your shopping, but you can go to Walmart, and you can go get an abortion, and you can go to a marijuana shop, and you can go to a liquor shop. Okay, that's interesting. Does COVID not spread in Walmart? Let's just go have church in Walmart then, and we'll all be safe, right? It's absolutely asinine. It's so ludicrous that anybody who stopped to think about this would say, this doesn't make any sense. You guys are lying to us. That's why they have to deplatform everybody. That's why they have to silence the president of the United States, the man who was elected by the American people to serve as the chief executive officer of our country, is not being allowed to communicate with the people who elected him because he's telling the truth. If he was lying, everybody would be able to say, oh, the president's lying. Isn't that cute? But he's not. That's why they have to censor him. So I think that's why we're seeing this stepped up censorship. Ultimately, I don't know that it's going to be successful. Every time they deplatform somebody from YouTube, they lose thousands of loyal viewers. They just move over to other platforms. I think we're going to see a mass migration away from the big tech companies. I was pleased to see the clown show in Congress yesterday with the big tech companies. Not that anything useful is going to come out of that, but hopefully it'll at least raise some awareness among the zombies that still haven't realized what's happening. But we were in crazy times then again.
It's interesting because you made a connection for me. We've been talking with and interviewing several guests about urban flight, this phenomenon where people are now in droves leaving New York City, leaving Los Angeles, leaving Chicago, trying to get out to where there's, a lot of people are going to the mountain states in the West and so on, trying to get where there's lower population density, more open spaces, where there's more freedom, where there's a freedom mindset. Also, so the analogy from urban flight to sort of big tech flight and media flight, people turning away from the media. Even during the Trump 2016 presidential campaign, he had to rely heavily on his ability to tweet directly to the people rather than go through the press briefings and that sort of thing and even after becoming president. So that analogy you just made for me was people fleeing the mainstream media, fleeing big tech dependence on our information, and fleeing the big cities might all be related. One thing that I want to circle back with, you talked about them moving the goalpost or changing the definition of what the real reasons are, because the old reasons don't hold water anymore. So first it was going to be, this thing's going to be hugely deathly, this illness. Therefore, the main goal was to reduce deaths. And then when it became clear that it was much less deadly than was thought, well, at least we need to flatten the curve so we don't overload our hospital system. And it will only lock down for 3 weeks or 4 weeks just to flatten the curve. And now that's not the goal anymore, because we have hospitals especially in regional hospitals in rural areas and so on, that are actually going out of business because they've had to curtail all kinds of elective procedures for people and all kinds of other things. Their ERs are empty, that sort of thing. But now it's just reducing the number of cases, spikes the number of cases, and we have epidemiologists saying that's not the point. When you got to get something to go through the population, you've got to have the cases happen. Look at the number of deaths that's just been continually decreasing over time, and it's not anywhere near what the death rate and you point out, even if the deaths are misreported, that the death rate is still lower than most other things that we don't take these kind of draconian measures of locking down people over. So just that moving the goalpost is changing the subject when the one becomes obviously untrue.
Yeah, and that's what's happening here. Almost everybody now seems to have forgotten. It was 2 weeks to flatten the curve, right? They were running around like trained seals. 2 weeks, they were barking. And now everybody's forgotten. Now it's just, you just don't care about people if you don't want to lock down. I mean, come on. How stupid do they think we are? And you talked about the flight away from big tech and then the flight away from the big cities. There's also another incredibly important example of that. That is the flight away from government indoctrination. I have been so pleased to see people fleeing the government indoctrination system. According to Gallup, they released a poll in August. The number of families that are homeschooling, families with school-age children, has now doubled. Okay, it went from 5% to 10% just since the start of the pandemic. So yes, the totalitarians have made a lot of progress, but there's also all these secondary consequences that really are bad from their perspective, right? They want all the children being brainwashed in a government school system. They want everybody stacked and packed in big cities where they can be monitored and controlled and made dependent and manipulated and surveilled and all the rest of it. They want everybody on the big technology platforms where you can't share alternative views and perspectives and news, even if it comes from medical doctors, because they depend on the propaganda machine to keep people compliant, to keep people doing what they want. So I think we're going to see increasing efforts to seal off all of these escape routes from big tech, for example. We're already seeing efforts to smash these smaller competitors. The founder of Gab, I mean, some of the credit card companies wouldn't even process payments anymore from. They even shut down his personal accounts. Right? Talk about cancel culture. Just wait till we get a cashless society. If you want a sneak preview, see what's going on. Now Twitter is banning links from BitChute. Right, so you can't share any videos that come from alternative video providers. They are absolutely desperate to prevent this exodus, and it's the same thing with the flight from the cities. The establishment wants everybody crammed into cities. In fact, there's been a conscious, deliberate effort going back decades now, orchestrated at the global level, right? This is coming down from the United Nations. It's happening all over the world to herd people out of the rural areas, off of the independent farms and independent ranches into mega cities, so that the big corporations, or in the case of some, like South Africa and China, so that the government can run the agricultural system, but, ultimately consolidate control over food production in smaller and smaller numbers of hands. And, the COVID scenario has really led to some reversal of some of that. As you mentioned, people moving out to open areas. And I think there's going to be some other secondary knock-on consequences that will also be very beneficial from a freedom perspective, including, for example, ending our reliance on communist Chinese supply systems. Right? We can start hopefully manufacturing more of our essential products here in the United States, medicines, vitamins, supplements, military technology, and so on. So there are some silver linings to all this. But we would be naive if we didn't realize the establishment will do everything possible to try to, at the very least, turn the tide and hopefully reverse it completely.
You mentioned homeschooling, and that's what I wanted to ask you as our final question is, for about a month and a half there, you could have almost accurately said, now everyone's a homeschooler. So we went from 5% to almost 100%. In the sense that as we walked around our neighborhood, I mean, the children were home with their parents, and it was nice to see families together, frankly, for a first time in a long time. The question I have for you is, as those schools now are reopening as virtual, at least partially virtual or mostly virtual, and students are attending online, some of the parents now, many of them, are observing for the first time what is actually the content of and the tone of what goes on in the classroom. And there's been a lot of blowback on that from educators saying, we don't want parent involvement. They have no place. We need to have this exclusive monopoly. And it's just that drumbeat of monopoly. We want a monopoly on information. We want a monopoly on education. We want a monopoly on medical options. We want a monopoly on all these things. So can you talk to us about what parents are learning that are perhaps driving some of those numbers that you're talking about in increased homeschooling, people who are actually declaring themselves as homeschoolers, even though what did everybody learn from that time of seeing what's happening inside their child's school world?
Yeah, it's been really phenomenal, and I've written two very in-depth pieces on this. I did a cover story in the New American Magazine about this a couple months ago, about the coronavirus kind of really boosting homeschooling and alternative forms of education. And also I did one in the Epic Times about the homeschool revolution getting a major boost from coronavirus. And what we're seeing is, for one, parents are seeing, now a lot of these kids are doing government school at home. So that, the government gives them a laptop and the government beams the propaganda through the screen. And in some districts, they've even said, hey, parents, you're not allowed to watch what's going on, right? That turned into a big scandal. Like, wait a minute, why can't we watch? We're paying for this. These are our kids. You won't let us see what you're teaching our kids? That's more than a little suspicious. So we've seen parents all over, and I've gotten so many emails from parents. Oh my goodness, they're pumping LGBT propaganda into my child's mind through the laptop. Oh my goodness, they're teaching fake history. They're teaching critical race theory. They're telling them that they have white privilege and that they need to repent of this alleged sin that they have because of their skin color. I mean, it's so idiotic. And parents are saying, wait a minute, that's not okay. I'm not going to subject my children to that. And then on the other hand, you have parents who are realizing that they actually can homeschool. Part of this was through the pandemic. A lot of the school districts didn't get their act together very quickly, and so parents really had an opportunity to just spend time with their children. A lot of moms left the workforce, and they said, you know what, our kids can't go to school. I guess I'll just stay home with them. Hey, let's do some homeschooling. What do you think is fun? Let's learn about, architecture. Let's do science experiments. Hey, we can do this, and it's fun, and, it's not for weirdos. And look, my child is enjoying it, and they're learning more. And so I think you're seeing both of these things contributing to this. And I think before this is all over, we will see even more explosive growth in homeschooling and alternative forms of education. I think online private schools will be big beneficiaries. In fact, I can say for a fact, I'm a teacher at the Freedom Project Academy. I teach advanced economics there. We've got record enrollment this year. We almost doubled the number of students from last year because of the coronavirus pandemic. And we've got students from all over the world, all over the country. And, that's an incredible boost to the future of liberty, because when children are getting a decent education, not only will they not be soldiers for the globalist elites who want to tear down civilization and implement totalitarian policies and globalism and all the rest of it, they'll be critical thinking, clear, God-fearing, liberty-loving individuals with the knowledge and the skills and the capabilities to resist. And I tell people, only half joking, I'll take a homeschooler with half his brain tied behind his back any day over, 100 government school victims, because the government school victims, they couldn't find their way out of a paper bag. They've been dumbed down to the point where many of them can't even read. They can't read their high school diploma. So this is all, I think, tremendously encouraging. I think we'll see a lot more of it. But again, we would be naive not to recognize that the establishment is not pleased, right? As long as there's one child being educated outside of the system, these people are freaking out because that one child could end up being like the kid in the story of the emperor who had no clothes. It's just going to take the one to say, wait a minute, emperor, you are actually naked. And everybody will look around and be like, oh my goodness, he said it. Oh my goodness, the emperor really is naked. And so they are just frantically, fiendishly trying to corral all the children back. And we've been getting letters here from our school. We'll give you free laptop. We'll give you free all kinds of stuff. Just please sign up for the government school system. No, thank you very much. We don't want your free laptop. In fact, you took my tax money to pay for the laptop that you're offering.
The laptop I already paid for, yeah.
Exactly. Such a scam. And the totalitarians, they're getting ready for a full frontal attack. In France, we just saw the globalist president there, Emmanuel Macron, just a couple of weeks ago, announced that they're going to be banning homeschooling. He said starting in 2021, all slaves must be handed over to the government at age 3, no exceptions for mandatory brainwashing. And in the private schools that we're going to allow to continue to operate, they're going to have to be teaching the government's insane curriculum. And Emmanuel Macron, to his credit, you would never be able to say this in America, but Emmanuel Macron was very open. He said, we're going to protect children from religion by having them in government schools. We cannot have, the obvious implication was, we've invited, millions of Muslims to live here and they might teach their kids to do jihad. Just today, actually, they beheaded a lady in a church while shouting Allahu Akbar. And so the French people are thinking, well, we don't want Muslims raising their own kids. But obviously this applies to Christians, and I think Christians really are the target. I called 8 years ago that they were inviting huge numbers of Islamists in from North Africa, from the Middle, ironically, the countries that they bombed to smithereens for the purpose of waging war on liberty and the nation state and homeschooling and all the rest of it. Now we're seeing it. And these types of things are going to be coming to the United States. Just this summer, the totalitarians at Harvard University, a law professor there named Elizabeth Bartholet, who runs their child advocacy program, teamed up with another lunatic from William and Mary, a law professor there called James Dwyer. And they've been very open about their views. Elizabeth Bartholet says there should be a presumptive ban on homeschooling. These children belong to government, not parents. Parents have no right to educate their children. The government must educate them, because otherwise parents might teach them things like Christianity or things that the government doesn't approve of. We've got to socialize them. The other guy, even more nutty, James Dwyer, he says that parental rights don't even exist, right? The reason he says that there's a relationship between parent and child is because the state confers that relationship, authorizes that relationship through paternity laws and maternity laws. This is absolutely bonkers. I mean, this is beyond even what like Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin would have said publicly. And yet we have totalitarians right here in the United States with very powerful backers, with backing of elite Ivy League institutions, peddling this idea that the government needs to protect children from their own parents. It's crazy. But anybody who thinks these people are going to go away is kidding themselves. These people are going to come back. They're going to bring reinforcements, and they are going to wage absolute, total, scorched earth warfare on educational freedom, on homeschooling. They're going to demonize homeschoolers as, backwards religious fundamentalists, as racists, as terrorists, as oafs, as cavemen. They're going to try to paint homeschool parents as abusive. And, get ready, folks. The propaganda campaign is coming. But I tell you, defend your right to educational freedom like you would defend the lives, the liberty of your children, because that's really what's at stake here.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you for specific tips on that. I do want to make one observation based on something you said, which is this sequence of stages that go through in this warfare, which most of us are just patsies in because we assume people are trying to do the right thing and we assume people have good intentions, that sort of thing. We don't realize until it just becomes so obvious and so extreme that we're being put upon. First is back when we were swimming against the tide, being early adopters of homeschooling, decades ago, or preparedness-minded folks or whatever. We were just told we were just being. People say, "Oh, you have tinfoil hats," or "You're kooky," or whatever. They were just kind of this harmless, but I guess questionably, your judgment was questioned out on the edge. Your children aren't going to end up properly socialized or whatever. Then it switches, as you point. When you start providing fact after fact after fact, you show the performance, you show the results and everything. Then, okay, like you said, if you're not going to comply with all these irrational edicts about overreach of COVID lockdowns or whatever, now it becomes personal. Now you're being mean, you're bad, you're a hater, you want to hurt other people, and it's like. So still, that's just phase 2. And then the third phase, it seems like, is what you're getting to, and that is you are a threat. You are a direct threat to stability of society or peaceful society or whatever, and so you need to be eliminated. So it seems like we're going through those phases in fast motion here.
Yep, that's what's coming, and we're already seeing it. We saw with the face diapers a couple of months ago, some absolutely ludicrous propaganda started coming out that people who don't want to wear face diapers are actually psychopaths and sociopaths, when the reality is exactly the opposite, right? Everybody remembers that experiment where they convinced people to, just listen to a guy in a white lab coat and electrocute somebody to the point where they were about to die, and, it wasn't really electrocution, but they thought they were, and they were just obeying the guy in the white lab coat. The ones who said no, those are the same types of people who are saying saying no to the brainwashing of their children, to the mandatory wearing of face diapers, to the shutting down of our economy. These are people who think critically and are willing to stand up against illegitimate authority when it is appropriate to do so. These are the same type of people who stood up to Adolf Hitler. These are the same type of people who stood up to the communist barbarians and butchers as they were exterminating millions of innocent human beings. These are not the psychopaths. These are the clear-thinking individuals who recognize that individual liberty is important, individual autonomy is important, and going along with the crowd when the crowd is wrong has very, very dangerous implications. And yet we see the demonization campaign getting more and more intense, and I think we need to expect that it's going to get even worse than that. Some of the plans that are being made right now, I think would be too shocking for a lot of people to grapple with. But there are very, very evil people. We would be, again, completely naive. We would be having to ignore all the lessons of history to not recognize that there are evil people in positions of influence, in positions of authority, in positions of power, who absolutely despise you for resisting their agenda, for resisting their efforts to centralize power over the lives of fellow human beings, for resisting efforts to loot human beings, for resisting efforts to steal the liberty of humanity. And so, all you have to do really to recognize that this is the case is look back in history, look around the world, right? Throughout human history, we have seen evil people rising to the top. You can name endless examples. We could talk for hours about, Pol Pot, Joseph Stalin, Chairman Mao, Fidel Castro, Robert Mugabe. I mean, this is just part of the human condition. We live in a fallen world. People are sinful. People are pursuing the lusts of the flesh. People are listening to doctrines of demons, and people do wicked things to their fellow human beings. We've been very blessed in America that we've kind of been sheltered from this for a few hundred years, but you have to just completely close your eyes to history and completely close your eyes to the rest of the world to not realize that those types of things happen. Those types of things are actually the norm. And, there's, I think, really naive people who think America is just somehow so special. There's just something in our DNA that makes us immune from the things that our fellow human beings have gone throughout human history for thousands of years all over the world. Sorry, folks, there's nothing special about us other than that we were founded on biblical principles, on the principles of individual liberty that protected us. We were built on a solid foundation. It took a long time to erode that foundation, but it has been eroded, and we are in great danger as a nation, as individuals, as families, and we need to prepare accordingly.
Yeah, and also the mention you made there to the separation, the intention to carve out children from their parents, people from their creator, and so on. That's not a new phenomenon in human history either. You mentioned the word demonic several times, and that is exactly trying to cut us off from the natural and inherent rights and our proper relationship and role with our Creator and His intention for us as families and as His people.
Yep.
Do you believe that the overstep and overreach that has been evidenced this year that people were shocked by, or maybe people weren't shocked by, but they certainly hadn't seen it exhibit itself before, has tipped the hand so that now more people will see that the emperor has no clothes on? Or do you think that the indoctrination has been sufficient and most people are just going to keep complying?
I think millions of people who in February would have called us conspiracy theorists and extremists and radical have now realized, and I know for a fact, I've gotten so many phone calls from family and old friends, like, oh my goodness, I used to think you were kind of extreme, I used to think you were a bit radical, but you were right, how did you know all this was coming? And I think that is happening to millions of people all over the world. That process has been accelerating. But there are also some people, I think, who will deny reality, who will deny the facts until, they're literally being marched into a camp. And I don't know what you do about that. So have the establishment, have the elites overplayed their hands? Maybe. Sometimes they do that, and typically what they'll do then is maybe take a step back, ease off a little bit, be like, "Oh, we were just kidding, guys. Don't worry, we're not going to make you slaves. Don't worry about that. We just got a little bit overzealous in trying to keep you safe because we love you so much. But don't worry, we're going to back off a little bit." And they do that from time to time when they push too far. They recognize that the resistance is too fierce. People are waking up too quickly. They might, they'll take 2 steps forward and they'll take 1 step back. Let everybody cool down, get used to the new normal, as they're referring to the current status quo, and then they'll take another 2 steps forward, and if necessary, another step back. I think that is their plan. But as we get closer to the end goal, these totalitarians, they talk openly now about what they call a new world order. They've defined it for us very clearly. George H.W. Bush went on national television and told us what it was: a world where the rule of law will govern the conduct of nations, a world where the UN's peacekeeping forces will implement the vision of the UN's founders. We know the UN's founders were Joseph Stalin and Alger Hiss from our side, the American, who of course was an agent of Joseph Stalin. We threw him in prison. So we know what their plans are. They've told us, and yet they took 2 steps forward. Too many people woke up. They took another step back. So we might see a little bit of easing off on the tyranny. But I think at this point, society has been massively destabilized. I think the election will be another destabilizing factor. The establishment thrives on chaos. It's a very useful tool for them to seize more power and seize more control, and then maybe they'll ease up a bit, let us get used to it, and try to move forward further. So I think that has been the pattern. I think that will continue to be the pattern. But the Bible talks about birth pangs. Birth pangs, if for any husband who's ever been with their wives when they've been delivering a baby, you know how that goes, right? It's like, screaming, hollering, and then you ease up for a while and everything feels okay and you relax, you take a deep breath, and you chill. And these contractions, they get closer and closer together. They get more and more extreme. I think that's a really good kind of analogy for what humanity can expect in the years ahead. And I do think a lot of people are waking up. I'm confident. And in fact, I think the world is going to see the greatest revival that ever has existed in all of human history at some point in the not too distant future. In fact, I think the Bible talks about that. But in the meantime, I hope people will prepare for difficult times, and that means having some extra food. That means having a plan B and a plan C for water. That means, if you're into firearms and self-defense, probably keeping some extra ammunition on hand. And if you can, try not to be in the worst areas, right? If you're in a Democrat state, in a Democrat city, you're probably not in a good place right now. Look at the cities that were torched during the riots that we saw. And some of this is still going on. The media is just not talking about it so much because they want Biden to get elected. But Portland is still facing crazy times. Seattle, you can expect similar stuff in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York City. Again, Democrat city, Democrat state. You want to be very careful.
So now some specific, we just got about 3 more minutes with you. So what are some specific actions that you think people should consider taking at this time if they want to protect themselves and their families and their communities from this encroachment and to preserve their liberties and restore it?
I always tell people the first and most important thing from my perspective as a Christian is you need to be right with the Lord, because, once you are right with the Lord, suddenly fear is not an issue with you, right? The establishment uses fear to control you. They use fear to get you to make bad decisions. That's how they got Americans to give up so much liberty during this COVID pandemic. They panicked everybody. Once you're right with God, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You don't have to worry about death. You're confident that when you die, everything's going to be fine. In fact, it's like getting a promotion. So suddenly they can't manipulate you in that way. Read your Bible, get right with God, and then secondary steps. The Bible says if you don't take care of your own family, you're worse than an infidel. So take that seriously. Make appropriate plans to make sure that your family is protected. And don't obsess about it. Don't get to the point where it's unhealthy, but do make sure that if supply lines get cut, that in Florida, we get hurricanes all the time. We sometimes go 2 weeks without power. The grocery store shelves don't get refilled. So it's a wise idea to have a backup plan. Make sure you have some extra food. Make sure you have some extra water. Make sure you have the methods and the means of protecting your home and your family. Do a security check of your house. If you have any savings, you might want to seriously consider ways to preserve that wealth. Just look at what's coming. Expect the value of the dollar to decline very significantly. Expect certain industries to be in some very serious trouble, and make your plans accordingly. And don't necessarily compromise. Don't compromise your moral principles, but also be wise. Right? Make sure that you are putting your financial resources in places that make sense. And pray, because I don't want to sound alarmist. I don't want to worry people. Again, I don't think the Lord has given us a spirit of fear. You should not be scared. It's a very, very dangerous emotion that can lead you to make bad decisions. But do be aware. Educate yourself. Inform yourself. I think ultimately, if we do want to preserve our freedom, The only way, absent divine intervention, is to have a renaissance of moral principles, right? You cannot be an immoral people and a free people. Those two things are not compatible. They can't exist at the same time. As John Adams said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's not suitable for any other. So we need Americans to recognize that there is a value in morality, that there is an objective standard of morality, and also we need to have education. Right now, if we got rid of Nancy Pelosi, the people who elected Nancy Pelosi would send somebody just like Nancy Pelosi back to Congress. Until those people understand the value of individual liberty, the importance of our Constitution, the wisdom of our system of government, they're going to keep electing Nancy Pelosi. So educate yourself. Get a subscription to the New American Magazine. Read your Bible. Get a subscription to the Epic Times. Read some books. Read theology, philosophy. Learn about economics. And once you are well educated, you can educate your children. You can educate your family, your neighbors, your community, the opinion molders in your community. And I think that is, the long but steady way to protect and to restore our liberties, if that's going to be possible.
Well, Alex, we just really appreciate your being here with us and with all of our viewers. I know that there's so many more areas we could open up here, but you've given us a good whirlwind tour of those. I think most people are going to have to go back and listen to this again 2 or 3 times. I know I am. And we just appreciate very much you joining us from New American Magazine, where you're the senior editor here on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on. God bless you. God bless all the viewers. And I really, really appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
To acquire gold and silver, just go to libertyandfinance.com. When the main site comes up, click on Bullion Sales. That's libertyandfinance.com, Bullion Sales. You'll see my name, Donegan Kaiser, my phone number, and my associate, Kaiser Johnson, his phone number, our email, libertyandfinance@protonmail.com.